and I run Gifted 2E Support, a community organisation that is designed to support twice exceptional people, children and their families through the tough journey that is living with twice exceptionality. And today we are talking about what it is to be twice exceptional. Twice exceptionality has many names. It used to be well known as gifted with learning disabilities or gifted learning disabled. That was the original term some 50 years ago when it was first researched. And some researchers still use that term today, and some organisations too, but more and more the most common term for twice exceptionality is 2E or twice exceptionality, and one that is becoming popular is multi-exceptionality. The reason for that is because often that second exceptionality is actually more than one. Often there may be one or two or three different exceptionalities that one child or person has. Another term that has been used in the past by some researchers is thrice-exceptionality, which means giftedness with a disability, with trauma, all three of them together. And I guess now that's being intertwined more into the multi-exceptionality perspective, because you can have giftedness with trauma and that's still a twice exceptionality. There's a lot of history in these terms, but it doesn't really matter what it's called. What's important is how twice exceptionality impacts on the child or adult that has it and their lives. I'm going to use the term twice exceptionality because I actually think it best describes it. I like multi-exceptionality too, but I've been using twice exceptionality for some years now, before multi-exceptionality became a real thing. So I'm continuing to use it, and I like the term 2E. It's nice and easy to say. You can say, oh, I'm 2E, 2E needs. It's a bit easier to say than twice exceptional needs. Twice exceptionality is complex, and no one person will be the same as the next. It is very, very high intelligence, also known as giftedness, usually in the top 10 percentile of the population, coupled with special needs, neurodiverse needs, disabilities. It can be trauma, it can even be LGBTQI, anything that is a challenge beyond what giftedness brings alone. So what does this mean for a twice exceptional person? Every child with twice exceptionality and person with twice exceptionality is gifted. It is the one thing they all have in common. Their exceptionality might be different. There are so many of them, but they will all be gifted. They will all be very highly intelligent in the top 10% of the population. So the first thing I'm going to speak about is giftedness. Giftedness is very high intelligence, but it's more than that. It is a different way of learning, different way of being, different way of thinking. Gifted children, their brains run much faster than the average population. The speed of their thoughts and feelings comes much faster than other people. They're also a lot more innately aware of their environment and what's going on around them. They're very observant, and they will be able to see, hear and feel things that other people may not. They also see the world quite differently to other people. They see the side of a problem that other people may actually never see. They're the kind of kids that will come out with these amazing answers and you think, how did I not think of that? But there it is. So, for example, a person who isn't gifted might be walking in the garden, enjoying the atmosphere, enjoying the colours and smells of the flowers. A child who's gifted would probably walk through that same garden and notice everything. They might notice all of the leaves on the ground. They might notice every feather, every petal on the flowers. They might notice the different colours in all the flowers, and they might choose to analyse that. They might notice the different smells. They might see that some flowers are dying and some are actually living and some are in buds, and they might start asking questions about that. And so rather than just walking past the flowers, they're going to start asking questions about everything about the flower. Oh, how many petals does that flower have? Why are some of them in buds? Why are some of them in bloom? And this might be a child who is 4 or 5 years old. That's really the essence of what giftedness is. And these children are so interested in learning and so into the world around them that they generally are constantly asking questions, or if they're not outwardly asking questions, because every child is different, they might be thinking them. But they're probably thinking and analysing all the time. Their brains never stop moving, never stop working. From the time they start in the day to the time they go to bed at night, they are thinking all the time. So for them, learning is a lot faster than the average child. An average child in general takes 5 to 6 times of getting the same information, so repeated information, in order for that information to then become concrete in their memories. A gifted child can do it in 1 or 2. And so you can imagine how frustrating that is when a gifted child goes into a classroom for the first time, so eager to learn, so eager to be at school and finally be able to learn how to read and write and do wonderful things with all of their thinking and their creativity, and then be walked through their ABCs when they may already know how to read a book, and they're being walked through their ABCs. This is A, say A. This is B, say B. You can imagine how boring that is for a child who already knows all of this. And even those children that come into school for the first time and they're not actually reading yet, not all gifted children read before they start school. They will pick it up so quickly that they are usually going to be above and beyond the other kids in their class, but within maybe weeks of starting school. And once again, they will start to become bored. I've got a story to go with this. My daughter is gifted, and she was really into maths as a little girl. From 2 or 3 years of age, we used to walk down the street, and every day she would be reading all the numbers on the letterboxes. And then she got a little bit older and started adding the numbers on the letterbox. 23 plus 2 plus 4. She started counting in repeated counting. She really loved doing that. She would sit in the car and just spend a whole car trip going 3, 6, 9, 12. She loved watching Numberjacks. And so in Numberjacks is a program on TV that was around back then, and it did mainly adding and stuff with cartoon numbers. And she loved watching it. From about 2 or 3 years of age, she was watching it. And she learned all about multiplication from it. So by the time she started school, her first day of school, she knew how to count into the thousands. She could add two-digit numbers together. She was doing most of her times tables from her head. And she wasn't even 5 yet at this point. She turned 5 3 months later, so she was 4 3/4. She knew how to read an analog clock. She knew how to read a digital clock. She knew what fortnights were, what weeks were. I didn't actually teach her any of this stuff. She just innately learned it on her own because she was so interested in numbers. 2 weeks after she started school, she comes home and she starts bawling her eyes out. And I'm like, what's wrong? What's wrong with you? And she's lying in my lap and she's saying, Mummy, I don't understand. Why can't any of the other children count past 10? And then I realized, what's she going to learn? What is she going to learn in this environment? She was so stressed out and so upset that she couldn't do her big numbers and her times tables and what was it? And why was every other child so different to her? And she wasn't even 5 yet, and she already realized that she was different. So we went to the back to the school, and her teacher was amazing. I told her what happened, and her teacher started extending her in class, which was actually a really good scenario. Unfortunately, that often doesn't happen. I come across parents in my work. I run consultancy through Gifted 2E support regularly that come to me and say, the teacher won't extend. They won't enrich my child because my child's refusing to do the simple work. And that's not the answer for gifted kids. You can't just throw simple work at them. They won't want to do it. If they have already learned it, they won't want to do it. Anyway, so that's what giftedness is. Now, let's throw a spanner in the works. Let's say that a gifted child who absolutely loves books has dyslexia. Now, this child, this is my son actually, I'll tell you his story too, to give you an idea of what Twice-Exceptionality is like. He was looking at books and memorizing them from us reading them to him from 9 months of age. As soon as he could crawl, he was off to the bookcase. He would pile the books up on the couch. He would climb up on the couch and he would sit there, turning the pages, reading the book, not actually reading the words, but reading the book from memory, because we were always reading him books ever since he was tiny. So once he was speaking, and he spoke very early, he was speaking in full sentences by 12 months. He started saying the stories out loud. Initially, when he was 9 and 10 months old, he just got the books and all he was doing was getting them and putting them on his lap. He had a big pile of books next to him and he would just be looking at them and pointing and talking about the pictures and saying words about the pictures. But once he started speaking really well, he actually would read from memory, almost word for word, what was in the book. He absolutely loved books. At 3 years of age, he was talking about wanting to be an author when he grows up. He loved making big, elaborate stories, and he had a huge vocabulary, much beyond his years. So, and he would make up stories about dinosaurs and monsters, and he would spend hours playing them out. He would draw pictures about them, and he was very keen to learn to read and write. He wanted to be an author, and he went into school and he's like, yeah, can't wait to learn to write, Mummy, because I'm going to be an author now. And then he got into school and he struggled. He really struggled. He couldn't get his hand to do what he wanted it to do. He knew the letters, he learnt them from the teacher, he knew how to write the letters, but he couldn't write them. He couldn't get them on the page, and he started becoming extremely frustrated. And he would take his work and he would tear it up because he just couldn't understand why he couldn't write. Desperate to learn to write, but couldn't do it. And on the other flip side of that, he was desperate to learn to read. And the teacher would send home these very simple books. The cat sat on the mat. Yet at home, we were already reading Roald Dahl books with him, and often he would help us read them. He would read sentences from them. So he was reading really early. And he hated those books. He very rarely wanted to read them. So I went into school and I said, look, he's reading so much better at home. Could you please give him harder books to read? And the teacher said, oh, we've tested him, and he is definitely a level 5. And I looked at her, and by this stage, I already knew that my son had issues with high sensory environments, lots of noise and things. Didn't know why yet, but I did already know that, noises and things distracted him a lot. So I said to her, could you do me a favour? Could you try testing him in a quiet room? And initially she objected, but then I went and spoke to the principal. Unfortunately, parents of twice exceptional children often have to do these things for their kids. They have to advocate really hard for their kids because there is a huge lack of understanding out there, particularly in schools, about the needs of twice exceptional children. There's a lack of understanding about giftedness as well, yet alone twice exceptionality, that adds a whole new level of complexity. So this is what I had to do. So I went to the principal, and the principal actually had a good word to the teacher, and she retested him. He was level 30, not level 5. So putting him in a quiet environment made all the difference. So they let him start reading harder books, and we also continued on with Roald Dahl at home because he loved Roald Dahl. And so that was good, but he was still struggling with the writing side of things. At this stage, we didn't know what was going on. We knew he was gifted. We'd had him tested. We knew he was gifted. But we didn't know everything else. I wondered about dyslexia because it ran in my family. However, he was such a strong reader. And dyslexics can't read, right? That's what people say. They can't read, right? They struggle with reading, so how could he be dyslexic? And the teachers would say the same thing. He can't be dyslexic. He's too good at reading. But his writing was totally illegible. There was nothing, you couldn't read any of his writing. He couldn't get his hand to do the right thing. So we went and got an assessment done by a psychologist and then an OT. And it was found that he had Asperger's traits, but not enough traits to actually get an Asperger's diagnosis. However, he did have sensory processing disorder, which means that the sensory things in his environment were overwhelming him, making it hard for him to concentrate. He also had dysgraphia. They found that in the OT assessment. And dysgraphia is exactly the problem he was having. He couldn't get his brain to talk to his hand so he could write properly. He couldn't get his brain to talk to his hand to get his hand to write in the right space on the page, to make the right shapes for the letters. So his writing was all over the place and very difficult to read. It took him many years. I think he was year 4 before he could actually legibly handwrite. But once we knew he was dysgraphic, we were able to support him using a laptop, which he took into school with him, and he learned how to type. And that made a huge difference. It meant he could write. He also did have dictation. He had an SSO help him to, LSA, for those people that don't know what an SSO is. They are people who are learning support assistants. They help kids with special needs. And so he got some of his work dictated for him. He would tell the story and the SSO would type it out for him. He also had some support with things like pencil grips and things. He got exercise from the OT to strengthen his hand muscles. And so finally we were onto something, but it wasn't the whole picture. 7 years of age, he started struggling to read for the first time in his life. He had done so well till then. He was reading, by that stage, he was reading Harry Potter and The Hobbit and had started reading Lord of the Rings. But he struggled with the long words in Lord of the Rings. He couldn't read those long words, and he could never, and it was the first time I realized he couldn't decode those words. He couldn't break them up. So I thought, maybe he has got dyslexia. So I was fortunate enough to have a specialist in Adelaide at the time who understood giftedness and dyslexia and how the two work together. So she tested him and found he was dyslexic. He had no phonemic awareness whatsoever. And what was happening was that his gifted brain was memorizing the shapes of the words, and that's why he could read so well. So he needed support for his dyslexia as well. But the point I'm getting at, twice-exceptionality is extremely complex. It will always have giftedness as part of it, always. But the other piece, the other exceptionality, could be anything, from hearing impaired to blind, to autism, to ADHD, to dyslexia, dysgraphia. The list goes on and on. That other exceptionality needs support, needs accommodations, needs assistance, while their giftedness needs enrichment, needs extension, needs acceleration in their talent areas. Because if they're not getting that acceleration, if they're not getting that enrichment, then they are going to end up identifying with this part of their personality that slows them down all the time. And they're going to start feeling like they're being dragged down and they can't do anything. And then mental health issues start coming in because they haven't received the support for their gifted side when they're young. Worst case scenario, they don't receive support for either their gifted or their disability. But in many scenarios, all of the support goes towards the disability and the giftedness is forgotten. And then they just end up going down this rabbit hole of feeling like they can't achieve, desperately wanting to, but not being able to do it because they're just not being given the support to get past their learning blocks so they can do it. So I guess to end this video, I just want to say twice-exceptionality is such a beautiful thing. It really is. If supported, if given a strengths-based approach where we focus on the enrichment and acceleration while accommodating those disabilities and learning blocks, then these children absolutely thrive and become the most amazing members of society. They do amazing things in the world. Einstein was twice exceptional. Newton was twice exceptional. To name a couple, Bill Gates is twice exceptional. And there are many, many more. And I believe personally that twice exceptional people have the potential to be so much more successful than anyone else because they have to work very hard to get there. So they're not scared of working hard, and therefore they have that determination and that persistence to be able to achieve what they want to achieve, where they want to go, what their passions, what their interests are. And they push into them. And they are such wonderful people to work with. I absolutely love them because they have the most amazing ideas about the world. Even beyond working with gifted kids. I also love working with gifted kids alone. But and I have been for quite some time. But Twice-Exceptionality adds a whole new layer. And if it's supported, if that other exceptionality is supported well, they become amazing people. So that's our first video about Twice-Exceptionality. My next video is going to hone in on some of the details on what Twice-Exceptionality entails, and I'm probably going to start with masking because that's a really important factor in Twice-Exceptionality. So stay tuned, keep an eye on our channel, make sure you subscribe and hit the bell, and we will be talking about masking next time. See you later.